Welcome to Peace, Love, and Pollinators, the podcast that's anything but your typical gardening show. We're here to transform how you see your backyard, balcony, or local park by uncovering the powerful connections between you, your plants, and the planet. From pollinator-friendly gardening hacks to creating green spaces that fight climate change, we explore more than just what to plant. We dig into why it matters. You are listening to Peace, Love, and Pollinators. All right, welcome to Peace, Love, and Pollinators. And today we have Karen Dooley. Karen is an ecologist and entomologist who grew up in Northern California. She moved to the East Coast to attend Tufts University, where she pursued a degree in biology. At Tufts, she discovered a passion for ecological research and joined Dr. Elizabeth Crone's lab, focusing on insect pollinators. She continued her studies with a Master of Science in Biology at Tufts and is now navigating the postgraduate world as she decides which direction she wants to take her interests. Welcome to Peace, Love, and Pollinators, Karen.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, the first question I'd like to ask everybody, because this is just something that totally interests me, is what really got you interested in the natural world? I mean, as I mentioned in an earlier episode, for me, it was my grandmother. She took me out into nature, and that's where that connection happened. So how did the connection happen with you?
Yeah, I think growing up in California and now living in the East Coast, I can really see how lucky I was to just constantly be able to spend time outside and even just have greenery all year round. And my mom especially really loved to spend time outdoors and would take my brother and I out camping, hiking, and just we would spend so much time playing outside too. We were really lucky to grow up with some incredible parks near our house as well. And so I've always been a bit of a nature kid, always really passionate about animals. I wanted to be a vet when I was little, and then I realized I didn't like blood.
Okay.
And yeah, I went to the, I think it was the Academy of Sciences, or no, it was the Exploratorium. They had a bullseye dissection, which was really cool, but I also realized maybe this isn't what I want to do. But I still was kind of constantly in that search of, I really have this passion and this interest, and I really love animals. I really love nature. And how can I keep that in my life, essentially?
That's excellent. That's a wonderful reason. And yes, as somebody who grew up in the woods, I can absolutely relate. So, with that though, you're saying you want to be a vet. What got you interested in the very small? What got you into insects and pollinators? Entomology that's a thing unto itself. So what's got you there and not just wanting to play with puppies all day long?
Yeah, I think this was very by chance almost. I really thought I wasn't going to study biology when I was in high school because I was like, it's not my thing. I'm not very naturally good at it. I've always really had to study a lot more for my science-based classes, but I really liked my environmental systems and societies class, and we got to do a research project as well where you kind of decided what you wanted to research, and I was really into that. And I got to college, I still didn't really think that was a path I could take. And then I realized, talking to some professors at Tufts University, that ecological research is a pathway. And so I reached out to a couple professors and happened to get a response from one of Dr. Crone's students, Atticus Murphy, who's now also Dr. Atticus Murphy, and he was studying monarch butterflies and their migration and movements. And so I was really excited to dive into this world. I mean, I've never been really afraid of bugs and liked insects a lot. I've always found them beautiful, but never really gave them much thought either, or really observed them that much. But then COVID hit. So I was really unsure if this was still going to be happening, but I was very annoying perhaps from Atticus's mind. I just kept bugging him. Hey, I really want to do some research related to this. And that's where we kind of fell into the urban insect populations and studying urban insects, because it was something that I could do by myself, socially distanced, was walking around cities, looking at different plants and looking at insects. And so that opened up almost serendipitously this whole branch of Dr. Crone's lab, looking at insects in urban environments.
I think that's excellent because I spent most of my career working in urban environments, and I didn't have the terminology to put to it. In your paper, you use, the terminology, the hypothesis, only show in town. which I was just like, oh, well, that totally makes sense. I spend a lot of time, building community gardens on vacant lots and trying to just take and make them as ecologically viable as possible. I totally hear you on insects. Once you realize that insects are more than just like what's under a rock, and you start to realize all that they can do, it just becomes fascinating that something so small has such a large impact, within the ecosystem. So can you tell us, really about, the only show in town hypothesis? This was something that you and Atticus came up with, or was already out there and you guys worked off of? And just kind of like let us know about, what that's all about, and so people can understand.
Yeah. So the research I conducted during my master's at Tufts looked at solitary bees, specifically the bicolored striped sweat bee, and their usage of urban environments. And there's this gap that we found, which was that there's been a huge increase in studying insects in urban environments and a lot of different scientific studies regarding that, but not really consistent results. So there's some studies that showed, as you'd expect, a really fragmented, full of pavement landscape is not good for insects, and there's a lot fewer bees and other insects in a city compared to outside of a city. But there's also some that show that there's actually comparable, if not more, abundance and diversity of bees in cities. We're very curious to know, there's not really a clear direction, but for those studies that show this positive correlation, is it because there's truly more bees in these cities, or is it because the way we're sampling these bees, frequently it's mimicking flowers by putting bowls out that are colorful and have like some sweet sugar water in it, and attract the bees? And is it attracting more bees to this area, and we're, finding more bees here and saying, oh, across the whole city, there's more bees here. Mm-hmm. And so that's where we coined two different hypotheses. The first is just plain old, maybe like the Field of Dreams movie. And that's also an ecological hypothesis, which is if you build it, they will come. Mm-hmm. We renamed it the Patch of Dreams because it's not really a field in an urban environment. It's really just a tiny little patch, whether through, like you said, a community garden, someone's front yard, even someone's planter on their porch. Mm-hmm. And so maybe these patches are really viable habitat that are attracting more pollinators into these cities. Or it could be that there's just more, almost a sampling bias created by how scientists are sampling these bees. And so, you're in this very resource poor environment, full of pavement, very few flowers, and you're suddenly putting out this very rare resource, and They might all be coming to that resource, and that data is not necessarily fully representative of the whole landscape.
Totally. I mean, you would expect everything to be fragmented and have just very few bees. So those former papers that are saying, fragmented landscape, not a whole lot of insects or not a whole lot of bees per se, it would make sense that you were just getting that small community of bees coming to your site more often. I love the fact that there was contrary evidence. That just got me very excited. And then the Patch of Dreams, the whole if you build it, they will come is just kind of what I've thrown into so many presentations, just saying like if you have a balcony, it doesn't matter. You can have a veggie garden, you can have a balcony, you can have, 5 acres, something will come. But what's even more is that those populations are in the urban environment, and it shouldn't be that hard to help support them. It actually should be even better and easier. I found all of this research very interesting. Why sweat bees? Was the first question. And I also found fascinating, which I would love to find out how you did this. How did you mark the bees? So you chose sweat bees, and I love sweat bees. They're actually one of my favorite bees. So I want to know why sweat bees, but then you actually were able to mark the bees to know if they were revisiting or if you had new friends coming to your site. So just get into that because it's just so fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. We chose sweat bees, particularly the bicolored striped sweat bee, which is Agapostum inflorescens. It's actually surprisingly common in urban environments, and it's also really easy to identify. It's bright green with, some black and white stripes on the abdomen, but it's easy to find, easy to identify. It's also solitary, so we could ensure, one individual bee is truly an individual and isn't affected by some more complicated eusocial or social behaviors that bees often do have. Mm-hmm. And then lastly, we also found over the course of the years through the Crone lab and other research with my colleagues that they do show very strong preferences for certain flowers. And so they really like things like purple coneflower and other asters. And so we knew that we could put out 2-foot wide pots of 5 purple coneflower plants and we would likely see the bee. And so it was just kind of a neat package of being able to, of an ideal study system. And obviously in the study, we also conclude that it would be good to do this with other bee species that have different traits that are bigger bodied, smaller bodied. But this was just a great starting off point just because of the ease of studying it.
I thought it was super cool. I would have assumed bumblebees, because that's just where so much of the research ends up going. But sweat bees aren't very big. So I want you to tell us about the marking pot, because I thought that was so cool. Because a sweat bee is not a very big bee. So how you are able to capture and mark so that you can do all this tracing. Just talk about that, because I found that so cool.
Yeah, so we use a very scientific tool called a bug vacuum. It's a toy you can find online, and they were great. We used to use nets, but sometimes in our catching of the insects, we would accidentally behead the flowers. So these were good because they're very gentle, very easy to use, and you could just catch bees in quick sequences as they were coming to the flower. And we then put them aside in a cooler until everything was done and we had the time to mark them. And so how we marked them was using non-toxic paint pens. And we used what we call a bee squeezer, which will be a little hard to describe, but essentially it just is like a plunger that uses gentle foam to gently press the bee against some mesh. And so the thorax is clearly exposed. We can go in quickly with our little paint pens, again, that are water-based and non-toxic, and do like a 3 series of colors to identify each bee. And that was what was really unique about the study and how we could tell, we could tell individual bees apart. So we could tell exactly how many individuals we marked total. And also we're looking at these plants and there's this green bee that I've seen 15 times now, and it might be, the same 5 bees that each visited 3 times, or it might be, 3 different bees that were each visiting 5 times. And so it really let us differentiate between these different behaviors. And it was really cool also, just as a side note, to see I was always asked, is this going to hurt the bee? But we would see the same bees over and over again. There's some that were super loyal, and the day we marked them to the end of the study, we're there every single time we were there. And they were still doing their normal foraging activities. We could see there's like a bit of dirt and the paint chipping off of it, so they're going in their nests. It's just cool to see, how frequently they come back. And once they find something they like, it's in their little routine of visiting these flowers.
So cool. So what you're saying is that there is a chance for our urban environments that the populations do exist, and with very little effort. You said a 2x2 pot and 5 coneflower. That's very little effort, essentially, and that's very little expense. So there is a chance that with all the balconies that we have and all the roof decks, we can make a difference in the population. Want to add the high-quality plants from Western nurseries but don't live near one of our garden centers? Not a problem. Now you can get the same healthy, vibrant plants delivered right to your door with Weston Farm to Door. We've partnered with our top growers to bring you the best of the selection. Pollinator-friendly natives, perennials, and more shipped nationwide and ready to thrive in your garden or home. Each plant is carefully packed and shipped, so it gets to you with the same Western Nurseries quality no matter where you are. And a special offer for Peace, Love, and Pollinator listeners: use code POLLEN8 for 10% off your first farm-to-door order. That is POLLEN, the number 8, for 10% off your first order from Farm to Door. Visit westonfarmtodoor.com and shop now to bring a little more green into your life. Delivered. So part of this study took place in Somerville. Somerville is one of the most paved areas in Massachusetts. I mean, at one point in time, I think it was like 75% pavement or something like that. I did a lot of stormwater work, so I remember like it is totally compacted, totally paved. So where are these, where did you find out where they were living? Like, how this is happening? Or did you just find out that they're there and be like, okay, they're here, so let's take action?
Yeah, so unlike bumblebees and more studied bees, it's a lot harder to find their nests just because they're like a pencil size width of a hole in any kind of loose soil, and it's just not very obvious. And sometimes people have them coming back every year and they observe them in their yards, but it's hard to kind of survey an unknown location for a possible nest entry. So we didn't find any nests.
Okay.
And a curiosity would be, if you put out these pots or big enough pots for a couple of years, would they end up starting to nest in the pots? That
That's
would
what
be
I was
something.
wondering. Yep,
Yeah, that'd
absolutely.
be something really cool to think about. But what we don't know also is their foraging range. How far are they able to fly in a day? It's there's very different results depending on what study you look at, and there's very few studies.
Mm-hmm.
But we know they're not as long range as something like a bumblebee that's bigger bodied, has more energy.
Yeah.
So there's definitely, even in the neighborhood where we had a site where it was 93% impervious or pavement levels around it. So that's a lot of pavement.
That's
but
a lot of
obviously,
pavement.
yeah, and it was within 100 meters, and they're likely not flying that much further. So obviously, even within that very densely paved area, they were finding places to nest because they were coming to visit our flowers.
Yeah, because from the studies that I've read, many of the smaller native bees, like the sweat bee, are going, meters. They're not even going like half mile, maybe a quarter mile, but it's more like within meters of where they are. So that would lead me to think that if we could invite people, empower people, inspire people, to start taking this action within our urban environments. I mean, even in the suburban environments as well. But, what it's saying is paved areas like Somerville, paved areas like Lawrence, that are extremely built environments, there's still hope for them. So, I mean, it does seem like this is a call to action that, as we say, at Peace, Love, and Pollinator, small step, big impact. That's really the thing. And again, it's just like you can do it on your balcony. So it sounds like there really is a chance for that. And this is a definite call for action. Did anybody get inspired? Did anybody ask you, did you have like some people on the street interaction, people being like, what is going on here?
Yeah, my favorite part so I've done 3 technically studies very much in urban environments where I spent a lot of time at specific sites and cities. 2 of them were the similar setup. In summer of 2022 with Dr. Murphy, we set up these same 2-foot wide pots with milkweed for monarch butterflies, and we looked at their egg laying or ovipositing. And we also again saw monarch eggs and caterpillars at every single pot at these sites in, again, Medford and Somerville, which is very densely urban.
Mm-hmm.
But being out there in the city we were frequently working in parks because it's a public space, parks or community gardens. It's just such a great way to do ecological research because you do have that people side of things. People out on walks were coming up to us, asking us about our research. Everyone is so curious too, and has all these incredible anecdotes of what they've observed. And so that just made every day that we were out there in the field so much more worth it, because we got to not only observe these insects and conduct our research, but do the community outreach side of things. And so we donated all the plants from both of these studies actually to interested neighbors. So we had people signing up for the plants, and we just made a crazy delivery route and delivered all of them, which was really fun. And it felt like so much more impactful because it felt like we were contributing to this research, also contributing to community knowledge, and then giving people that little starting point of a couple plants to add to their own yard.
Absolutely. That becomes the coolest coneflower in your yard, because that was a part of Tufts research. Like, That's my coneflower. This is my super cool. I know they look alike, but this one's super cool, and let me tell you why. But I think it's great that like you didn't set up these sites and then actually have all of that disappear. So you have like all of these sites, you're supporting these populations, and then okay, research is over, pull it out of there, and then all these bees that were so well fed, they probably had these wonderful broods, and now they're all emerging, and they're just like, Mom told me there was going to be food. I was promised food. So, all right. I mean, I think that's great that it got to stay in the neighborhood and that you did that, because that empowers and inspires people. Especially once they know it's a part of that research, they're going to want to probably go out and learn about native plants or get more native plants. So, I think that is absolutely excellent. Was there any other like factoids, whether interactions with people, like anecdotes, like interactions with people, or anything else that like you found that you were like, this is like one of my takeaways that I just found amazing, or would never have seen this coming, or whatever it might be?
Yeah, I think we've already touched on it, but essentially, I think for both of these studies, but particularly this last one, I was putting these pots out in places that I was like, there's no way these flowers are going to thrive and that we're really going to find all that much. And we found this very specific bee and other bees and other insects at these flowers at every single site. And some of them were in literal parking lots. So it's very inspiring to know that you can do really small step and still have an impact. I think there's been such a huge movement for native planting and pollinator gardens, which has been incredible, but it can sometimes be very scary or feel like it's a lot of steps.
Or a lot of money.
Yes, and a lot of money. It's not accessible money-wise. And so being able to showcase, you can put out a small pot. We've even overwintered these pots, which is a great other anecdote. Like you can leave your plants in there and they'll come back just like perennials in the ground, as long as there's enough soil in there. But you can have that on your porch and you can be helping pollinators, even if it's not, transforming your entire lawn with...
Right. But you do need to water these pots.
Oh, yes, you do.
The biggest thing I get is people say, I want native plants because native plants don't need any maintenance. They don't need... No, you do. Like, if you are to put your native plants in pots, you do need to tend to them.
Yes, definitely, just because they're in a smaller space. And so they, dry out a lot faster. We used living soil pots, which had like a plastic lining, which helped keep it not too dry. I mean, summer of 2022, we were watering those every single day because it was so dry. But it created like a little oasis because everything else was dying from drought. We had our beautiful water pots.
That's just awesome. Now, I didn't ask, did you get similar results with the monarchs? Because like sweat bees, that's very cool to me, but monarch, that's sexy. That's the poster child for pollinators. So yeah. Did you get those similar results? Like in the middle of a parking lot, you had monarchs visiting?
Yeah, so we were looking at whether, there's people have milkweeds in their yard now, which is fantastic. And we're looking at where is the ideal location to add more milkweed? Is it because if there's a lot of flowers around, monarchs need both the milkweed to lay their eggs and to feed their young, but they also need fuel. They need to, go to the grocery store and get their food to be able to keep mating, laying eggs, and finding those plants. And
migrating.
Yes, and then migrating. So we were looking at, proximity to milkweed. If there's a lot of milkweed in the area already, is it going to get saturated almost? Is there going to be less use because there's so much to use? And somewhere along that curve, there's got to be that sweet spot. And then proximity to floral resources. Is it, if you're near to a lot of flower gardens, people with, a lot more flowers in their yards, or just more green space in general, will there be a higher monarch population because they're attracted to those areas?
Did you plant mixed pots at all? Like a pot that had milkweed and, say, asters in it, so you were like supporting the life cycle on both ends, or was it one or the other?
It was just we planted swamp and butterfly weed together. Yeah.
Okay.
So because we really wanted to isolate, we weren't looking at their nectaring behavior. We were just looking at, we were not even really observing the monarchs. We got to see some, but just flipping over every leaf and looking for the eggs, which was tedious for sure, just because they're hard to spot. But
Yep.
so we found that there's higher oviposition, so egg laying rates, with more flower gardens nearby. And we also found that the higher milkweed density, we saw a negative effect. So like if there's a lot of milkweed nearby in gardens nearby, you might see less monarch activity on your specific milkweed stem because, eggs per stem, there's a lot of stems, so there's fewer eggs per stem.
So it's not really negative.
No.
Excuse me. It's not negative, but it's negative to the study.
Yes. But it's not, it shows a satiation, but it's not necessarily like, oh, there's fewer of them, they're laying less eggs. It's just that there's so many resources for them to use and only so many monarchs in urban environments that we just see a fewer of them in the very specific 2-foot pot that we're studying.
No, absolutely. And I think, but it's just important that I want to put out there is that, yes, you want to have, your milkweed populations for the caterpillars themselves, but it's that, especially through our urban environments, it's those late blooming, plants that are going to help with that whole migration and everything. So, I mean, like that's where I was wondering about like the double pots, but
yes, yeah.
Put a couple pots out, put one with your asters and goldenrod, and then put one with your milkweed. And if you're not doing a scientific study, you could really get creative with your pots. So I'm just really loving this, this idea. It's just because, like I said, it's something that I've intuitively believed in, but now you've proven it. So, and, and Tufts is behind it. So that's huge. So that is all good.
Yeah, no, I mean, we've touched on, nesting habitat is important. It's kind of looking at all of it and encompassing all of the life cycles that you can. So planting plants that bloom from early spring all the way to late like fall, like you said, the asters and the goldenrods. Then you can leave your stems in the garden over the winter, and that gives some nesting habitat. Don't want to mulch on certain areas. They can't really dig through the mulch, and leave some uncovered soil. That's always great. And then providing those host plants for butterflies. But again, they can't use the host plants if they have no energy to fly to it. So,
yeah, totally. Yeah. Do you feel there's enough support for young ecologists and entomologists, navigating their next steps? And what advice do you have for someone thinking they want to study this and they want to go into this? I mean, I think it's absolutely wonderful. Is there enough out there for ecologists beforehand and after the fact?
Yeah, I think beforehand, it was just not something that ever crossed my mind as a possibility. And I think part of it was just, it's not a very typical career route either. And so I was really lucky to be going to a research university. But on the other hand, Tufts isn't necessarily super ecologically focused, especially in the bio department. It has a lot of different disciplines, but it's not necessarily a gold mine of different ecological research that you can be doing. And so I think I wouldn't change anything, my life path whatsoever, but I think if I were going at it again from the perspective of someone interested in ecological research, it would have been nice to think about it a little more before going to college, just to really select the school based on exactly what I wanted to study. And again, it all happened to work out wonderfully.
And it sounds like it worked out perfectly.
Yeah,
that's
so
awesome.
I'm so grateful for that. I think just if there's any way to increase outreach, I think a lot of my community outreach ends up being older community members or just not necessarily high school age students. And so I think that's something that could definitely use a bit more focus, is spreading that knowledge and passion for pollinators and scientific research to that younger generation who's starting to think, how exactly am I going to orient myself? And post graduating, I think it's hard coming from a very academic space, and that's something that I'm currently struggling with, just because there's kind of a divide between academic roles, pursuing that PhD route, versus trying to make your way into, a non-academic career. And so that's something that I'm currently navigating. I'm really grateful to still be involved in things like this. And that's something that I want to keep a balance with wherever I end up, just to keep these, these roots that I've set out, because even just talking today, it's really clear. It's a great reminder that I love talking about this stuff. I've learned so much about it, and it's so exciting to share it with other people. And so it's just a matter of kind of finding out like how exactly I want to balance these different worlds, and how can I keep pollinators in my life.
All right, so just the last question, that I would like to ask you. What is like one action item? Like if people are going to go out and start this season and they can only do one thing, whether it be urban or suburban, what is one thing that somebody can do that can make the difference, that can change the world?
Yeah, I would say plant more flowers if you can. Plant native flowers, but if you really only have access to non-native cultivars and hybrids at your garden center, just planting any sort of flowers and avoiding pesticides, because if you want the bees to be alive, you can't put pesticides on there. But just adding more flower volume, I think, is just a really accessible way to get started. And then there's a bunch of sub steps you can take after that initial step. I think as a person, when I start a new project, getting started is just really the hardest part, especially when it feels like it can be such a big undertaking. But it doesn't have to be such a big undertaking. You don't have to, like I said, transform your whole lawn. It's awesome if you do, but it's not a possibility for everyone right now. And so adding a planter of flowers, or, instead of, if you were planning already to add in more flowers into your garden and can swap a few out for some native plants, just doing those small little lifestyle changes is something that can really have a big impact, much more than people think. And living, for example, in Somerville, you could think, how much is my porch plant really going to do? Or I can't really do much because I have barely a front yard and I'm a renter, for example. Mm-hmm. But this study has shown it does have a positive effect. It's also just like, we spend so much time in urban environments now. So many people live in cities and suburban and urban environments. And so it's just a fantastic avenue for conservation. And it's also really fun. Like, I think approaching it in a fun way of wanting to observe these pollinators, spending an extra 15 minutes outside, planting your plant in your pot, and then maybe observing it from time to time, and you'll be shocked by what you see. I think we started this talk about how I never really spent that much time, and you said so either, like looking at insects and really thinking about the insects around us. But it's incredible what you can see in just a short amount of time if you just, focus on one flower and spend a couple of minutes just watching it. And you'll see so many different kinds of bees. They come in different shapes, sizes, colors.
Absolutely.
Then, yeah, butterflies, flies, beetles, wasps, so many different things to look at.
First of all, happy bees don't sting. You don't have to be, and sweat bees aren't going to sting you anyway. But it's just, it's amazing to see all the different colors. This is nature, it's just like, you see those iridescents or those metallic colors and just, on these bees. And then you have some that are just so, so plain, or you'll see a moth and you'll be like, oh, it's just brown. But then when you actually look at the wings, you'd be like, wow, if that was actually laying on a branch, I'd never see it. Absolutely fascinating. So it doesn't matter if you have a fire escape, a balcony, or a full-on yard, plant something is the key. I love that we're talking about flowers. I love that you said more flowers, because what we try to advocate for on the podcast is the balance between the natural world and the built environment. Well, bees love flowers, people love flowers. So it's like, if you're going to put pots out anyway, why not try to introduce some natives? First of all, ask your nursery to get some natives, but make sure that you're buying, neonic free, so that you're not setting a trap, for those bees. But I absolutely love that. I am so grateful that you came on, because I was so excited for you to share this research, and would just love for you to tell us where we can find you and find out more information about you.
Yeah, so I was a part of the Tufts Pollinator Initiative while conducting my research. Again, that whole community outreach side. So I don't have any official website or anything really, but you can check that out as a resource. We have a fully comprehensive website with a lot of different different things. And if you go to the people page, you can also find me and my contact information as well to reach out, my email, shoot me some questions. I'm happy to chat.
So what's the Tufts website that we're going to?
Yeah, it's if you just type in Tufts Pollinator Initiative, it should come out.
And then we go to the people page, we find you, and people can absolutely hit you with questions.
Yeah, I'm always happy to chat. And again, that's a great resource. This whole podcast is a fantastic resource. And there's so many things out there. It's incredible to see this boom almost and people connecting with pollinators and really finding a passion within it. So it's awesome to see.
Excellent. Karen, thank you so much for coming on. And I wish you the best of luck in finding your directions. And I hope that you continue doing everything that you're doing because it's absolutely awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.